Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. Today we are going to be taking another look into Judaism, and in the light of our recent coverage, I wanted to make a point of the recent logo update and change. Previously, the podcast cover work and related logos have depicted Charles Manson with the swastika symbol on his forehead. I've decided to change the logo slightly. The depiction is now of Manson with the cross etched into his head that he originally had before changing it later on. The importance of the cross is that some of his followers were quick to join him in etching crosses into their own foreheads, and of course removes the swastika symbol from the podcast too. I have changed the logo in as many places as I can think of. If you do come across the old logo, please get in touch and let me know where you've seen it. Also, for anyone who wasn't aware or didn't realise the small change, I've had a few questioning emails and messages about why the podcast doesn't contain content that is explicitly only around cults. I wanted to take a quick moment to clarify that, as much as I believe the word cult means something different to each person, the podcast is now featuring experiences from ex-cult members as well as those who have been in high-demand religious groups or high-demand control groups. This may go some way to explain to some of the listeners why we feature a lot of religious content on here that some people believe does not align with the definition of the word cult. So from here on out, we will be focusing on cults, high-demand religions and control groups, and allowing this platform to continue being a place for any and all to come and chat. We are quickly heading into December, and before the end of the month, we still have our memoir giveaway on the go, with Helen Zuman's memoir, Mating in Captivity, about her time spent on Zendik Farm. This is the featured book of the month, and for a chance to win, all you have to do is follow, like, and comment on any of my social media content across November. You can find me on most platforms at Cult Vault Pod. Also, thanks again to those who have subscribed on YouTube and left reviews. It's all been really helpful. Today's episode is with Rob. You can watch the filmed interview between me and Rob if you are a Patreon at patreon.com/The Cult Vault, where filmed interviews are released monthly. In this episode, we discuss how people can independently choose to move further into religious movements without the pressure of family and friends, and how they can also move away from them independently too. There are sensitive themes in this episode, as we discuss the Holocaust briefly, so please do listen with discretion. Now here is Rob. So hi, Robert, and thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be discussing Judaism, which I am really looking forward to because I've only covered it once before on the show, and that was pretty recently, and I was shocked at the high demands of the Orthodox Jewish community. So would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hello, I'm Robert Williger, and grew up in Chicago suburbs, and currently living outside Orlando, Florida. So
And what's the weather like over there? Right? It's a warmer part of the world towards Florida, I'm assuming.
Yes, it is warmer. I am in shorts. It is in the probably in the low 80s today.
And what happens around Christmas time in the winter months? Do you get any, will there be any trace of snow where you are?
No.
Very warm all year round.
I mean, it gets it might get 60s, 70s, but occasionally it'll get down to freezing, but no, not too much.
So this particular sect of Judaism we're going to speak about today, is that a sect that you were born into?
I was born Jewish, but my family was originally, I'd say Reformed Judaism. So very much just kind of culturally Jewish, would observe some practices like going on the holidays or going to the synagogue, but it was more about the social aspect of the religion than the actual religion itself and the religious practice. It was more about the community and being with the environment. So that was probably up until I was about 10 years old. At 10, my mother remarried. Parents were divorced, mother remarried. And my stepfather was a much more traditional environment. His kids were actually Orthodox Jewish. He was very traditional. So things like the kosher home, so like the Jewish dietary laws, which we didn't really observe prior to that. Definitely didn't, definitely not in the house. I mean, I'd say we were kind of like, certain things culturally, like, we never had ham or bacon or anything like that in the house, but eating that stuff outside was always done. So my stepfather had a kosher home. So that was kind of a adjustment. So that was really like my first exposure to a lot of that.
And at 10 years old as well, I mean, you're pretty much well on your way to knowing your likes and dislikes with things like food and drink and what you enjoy eating and what you don't enjoy eating. And that's a big kind of transition to make at the age of 10.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a transition, and especially as some of the stuff we'll probably get into a little more, like his when his children would be there they didn't live with us, they lived with their mother most of the time, but they'd be there like every other weekend. And we'd be doing things, but they would be observing the Sabbath, but we weren't.
Right. Okay.
Or it might be something like there'd be weeks that maybe I'd go to the synagogue, we'd have Friday night dinner, and then I'd go out with my friends afterwards. So we'd have the Sabbath meal, I'd be there for that, and then I would go out with my friends or things like that. So I was still pretty much free to, as well outside of the house, I was pretty much free still to do what I wanted. I mean, I was in the public school system. They did want me to go to a Jewish day school. That was still more a conservative, more liberal, not an Orthodox. But I did push back against that, just because we were also moving to a new area. So I didn't want to deal with moving to a new area and going to a totally different, I already was going to a different school, but would rather go to the school where I'd meet kids who lived around me and things like that, as opposed to one where there wasn't.
It would have been lots of more transition then as well if you were to go to a new school and a new house and incorporate this new kosher household into your everyday rituals as well. That would have been like a lot for a young mind to comprehend. So I guess in some ways that it's good for you that you were able to stick up for yourself and say, don't put too much on me at the moment because I'm going through a lot.
Yeah, and there wasn't too much resistance from they were pretty okay with that if I didn't want to do it. So that was no issue.
So you grew up in a pretty liberal Jewish household where you would go to the synagogue occasionally for some services. Was it always the same building as well that you attended at these times?
Yeah, I mean, from age 10, yeah, it was the same one, because especially with his kids, because like, so at that time, I mean, I eventually, because they wouldn't drive and stuff to the synagogue. They only, on the Sabbath, you can't drive. So we had to be walking. I mean, it was about little over a mile away. So it was pretty much the same synagogue we'd go to. And it was it's really a kind of more a Midwestern, it's called the traditional synagogue, which it was pretty much like there's the different groups. There's the main ones are Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Judaism. And then within there, you have different breakdowns, especially when it gets to the Orthodox. Traditional falls kind of in between conservative and Orthodox. It's pretty much similar, except they don't, conservative allow more roles for women as far as in the services and the prayers. That traditional are closer to the Orthodox when it comes to that.
Which is interesting actually, because I posted the other episode that I put out with Lonnie, who spoke about his experiences with Orthodox Judaism. And I posted it in the ex-Jew subreddit, and somebody came back to me and said, oh, it'd be really interesting if you could interview somebody who was raised Orthodox Jewish from a female perspective, because there are so many things that they can't be involved in. And I had absolutely no idea about this. The only real exposure that I'd had to life growing up within the Jewish community was from my interview with Lonnie. So he didn't mention anything about the restrictions that women face when they are growing up in some sects of Judaism. So hopefully you might be able to shed a little bit of light on that for us as we go through. So your parents have divorced and your mum has remarried. You've moved into a less liberal household, a little bit more on the Orthodox side than you were used to. And how is this seen, do you think? Or maybe because you were younger at the time, you wouldn't maybe have noticed anything. But do you think, looking back on it now, that your mum and your mum's husband might have been viewed in a different way because she'd remarried? Was there any stigma attached to that sort of thing in places like the synagogue that you attended?
No, that I don't think there was anything. There was pretty much, Judaism, doesn't have the same type of stigma of divorce that other religions have. Obviously, try to minimize, it's obviously, but obviously no one wants it, but yeah, no, it's not, there's not the same type of stigma that I know some religious groups that is really frowned upon. So
yeah, it's just an interesting thing to ask, I think, because I've just finished interviewing somebody yesterday, so that episode will have released a week before this one, and Cameron spoke about her experiences in a sect of Pentecostalism called the Assemblies of God, where it was very much seen and very much stigmatized for you to divorce within that particular branch of Pentecostalism under Christianity. So I just thought it'd be an interesting side note to see how it's viewed within communities that practice Judaism. So thank you for providing that insight for us. And you mentioned that you attended public school. Was it just you or brothers and sisters that were separate to your new step siblings?
I had one older brother, about 3.5 years older. So he definitely was less connected to any of, because he was already a little older. So he was already, because there's things like, there's the bar mitzvah for males at age 13, and for females that have the bat mitzvah at age 12, which is like the coming of age ceremony. And so my brother he had his before they were married. So he was already kind of out of the Hebrew school, because I did go to, even from age, from first grade, went to Sunday school at the synagogue. So there was that. And then when I became 10, when I went to that synagogue and went to the Hebrew school there, it was actually 3 times a week that I'd be doing Jewish studies. So
right,
after school, it would be it was Tuesday, Thursday. It was maybe 2 hours or so after school, and then Sunday morning for a few hours.
Oh my goodness. So you went from having your synagogue related activities increase when you moved into this new home and in this new area as well?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, I did have that at the Hebrew school. So that was 3, and especially because that was, pre-bar mitzvah. So that's where for the non-religious, most Jewish education kind of goes to at least age 13, so that people have this ceremony, and then it kind of, a lot of people fall off. So even some of the most liberal Jews might send their kids to a Hebrew school up until age 13, so that they do the bar mitzvah, bar bat mitzvah, and then move on from there. The Jewish Sabbath is Friday night to Saturday night. And the long service, the main service is Saturday morning. And that service, I mean, that every week there's one, and that could be anywhere from about 2 to 3 hours.
Right, 2 to 3 hours. So you've got Tuesdays, Thursdays, a Saturday service, and then sometime on Sunday morning.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I wasn't always at the Saturday service. That wasn't
right.
I mean, a lot of times that would kind of depend. Even my parents, they didn't necessarily go every week. Some of that would depend. If my step siblings were there, then they would go because they were more religious. So if they were there, we'd go. So maybe every other week or something like that.
So on a week where you do attend that service, you're looking at around about potentially 8 hours a week committed to synagogue related activities.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
And at 10 years old, that's quite a significant amount of time, really.
Yeah, no, it really.
Did it feel at the time like a lot of your life was being spent in this environment?
It did feel a bit, but it's like I did have several of my friends were there. Like I did have friends there, and it's like I knew other. There was like there's a large Greek community, and like the Greek kids went to Greek school a couple of times a week to learn like Greek and about their culture. So, so it just kind of like was just a thing that was done. And, I had a lot of Jewish friends. So it was kind of like, I was definitely glad when it ended, but it was definitely, didn't really stand out too much as like this much because
you mentioned before that when people of Jewish faith observe Sabbath, that's Friday night to Saturday night. So is it like sundown to sundown?
Yes, it is.
And is that one of the core practices of Judaism, would you say?
Very much so. That is definitely a huge part of it, is the Sabbath.
Okay.
I mean, observance of the Sabbath is one of the key things. I mean, if you want to look, if you look biblically according to the Torah, according to that, blatantly violating it is subject to the death penalty in ancient times. Yeah, so it's.
So the Torah is like the Jewish
Bible,
biblical text that is studied, and so you're saying that if we were to look at that and take the scripture literally, it would mean the death penalty to not observe the Sabbath.
Yes, there's like certain things you have to like know that you're breaking it and be warned, and but no, it is a very significant part of the religious beliefs, is the observance of the Sabbath.
Right. And what other core principles and practices would you say are most important to the Jewish community and the identity of Jewish people?
I think the other big one is the dietary laws, the kosher, which I know it's kind of touched on in the other interview I listened, but basically there's some things like not mixing meat and milk. So no cheeseburgers, no having milk with your, if you're eating meat, having it with it. There's no eating shellfish. Any meat that you do eat needs to be ritually slaughtered in a certain way with a knife, in one cut, like, so you can't shoot, no hunting, like animals can't be hunted. And then the animals that you can eat, there's specific requirements that they chew their cud and they have split hooves. So like cows are okay, goats, but like no pigs, no anything like that. Or fish need to have fins and scales, so no shellfish.
Yeah, if you could tell us more about that. And I know that a lot of the time, some of the stuff that if I'm covering a topic that's been covered on the show before, I never know if there's people listening who might not have listened to that specific episode. So I
Makes
always
sense.
think that sometimes it's worth going back over things like the difference between observing the Sabbath and like a Sunday service, and the differences between Judaism and Christianity in that sense.
Yeah.
So
So,
definitely go into as much detail
okay.
about it
Yeah.
as you would like to.
So, I mean, it's like, and then um, it gets into levels of that every product needs to be supervised, and even you can't just go into the store and buy something off the shelf. You need to look at the product and see if there's organizations that various organizations that certify things as kosher, and it's a big so there'll be symbols on food. Like there's a Circle U, which is the Orthodox Union, a Circle K, which is another organization. And these are just rabbinical organizations that are paid by the manufacturers to go in and certify their products. Because I mean, thousands of products out there in the general public have the kosher certification because it costs the company a whatever, a few thousand. It's a marketing cost. It's worth it if their product already, obviously, if you're making something like cookies, chips, candy, you might as well appeal to the broadest market.
Yep.
So it comes down to a business decision that some of these organizations, some of these companies, I mean, things like Oreo cookies, M&Ms, things like that are all certified kosher, so people can eat them. But again, most people don't even notice. It's just some little, back in the nutrition label and things like that, there'll be a little symbol. So I mean, during my Orthodox time, I mean, I'd be in stores like looking at products, like sitting there holding up the jar, like, okay, is this or things like that.
It's insightful that you mentioned that people who might not be familiar with the kosher diet might have looked at the nutrition label 100 times to check how many calories are in something, or to check if there is like wheat or eggs or fish included in the product, but never really noticed or realized what the little U on the back of the packet might be for. And that to you must be something that after the age of 10 you became very accustomed to checking for.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And I mean, in the funny thing, I mean, some companies have actually turned this into actually really using this. There was Baskin Robbins, an ice cream place here. They had a little sign saying our products are of such high standards that they're certified kosher. So that like those who understood, and those who didn't, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, especially now, there's all these, there's all the gluten and organic, and now there's like a dozen certifications on most of the foods, at least in America.
I think in mainstream society, though, aside from people within the Judaism, the Jewish community, there's almost, the term kosher is applied to all sorts of things that are not relevant to talking about the kosher diet. So somebody might say like, oh, is that kosher with you? And you're like, yeah, that's kosher with me. Like terminology for, yeah, that's cool, that's good, that's okay. So people must, like, maybe that came from like checking the packets going, oh, that's kosher. Yep, that's kosher. Oh, that's kosher.
Well, the direct translation would be proper, is the direct translation.
Okay. So then even then it does still apply, which is it's strange how these small pieces of terminology make their way into sort of pop culture and popular rhetoric and communication amongst day-to-day people who maybe don't understand where that particular piece of terminology has come from. So that's just another interesting aside. And you mentioned that your education was in public schools, so you had the opportunity to interact with plenty of people outside of the Jewish community, or was there a lot of other Jewish people within your peer group?
It was probably a mix between Jewish and non-Jewish. There was definitely anyone who was on the Jewish side where I lived was definitely on the more liberal. Anyone that I was friends with was definitely on the more liberal side of things. Any of the more Orthodox, well, they all lived about about a mile away because they lived closer to the synagogue because they wanted to be a few blocks away.
Right.
So a lot of them did that, and most of them actually went to different religious day schools. They weren't in the public schools.
Okay.
So where I was, it was kind of a mixed. I definitely would though of the more religious, but in that area.
Would you say that where you were living once you had moved to the new area, would you say that it was a heavily populated area of Jewish people, or was it just
No,
was it just kind of a mix?
It was just kind of a mix. It was just a regular suburb where, we actually moved from where we had lived actually my mother, from age 6 to 10, that was actually an area, Skokie, which is actually was a very heavily Jewish community. There was a whole legal thing because in 1978 or something, the American Nazi Party wanted to specifically march through Skokie because there was a significantly large Jewish population, and especially a large population of Holocaust survivors. And I think it ended up at the Supreme Court, and they eventually got it that they pretty much marched in. They marched in downtown Chicago, but so Skokie was the area we moved to. There was this one traditional synagogue, and then later there was what's called the Chabad, which is a Orthodox group that does a lot of. They're ultra-Orthodox. They would be, Hasidim or what they're called. They're the ones with the black hats, the long coats. They opened a place out there. So they had a place in that area because there was a lot of, this was late, so we're talking, early, mid-'80s. This is when the Soviet Union was still active, and there was a lot of efforts trying to get the Soviet Jews out of Russia. So that was why, and a lot of them were moving to this area where we lived. That was a popular area where some were settling. So that's why Chabad decided to open up a place there to try to reach out to these people.
You were living in a heavily populated area, but you've moved where it's not as heavily populated with people in the Jewish community. And I'm just wondering how it felt for you, such a young age, for your mum to remarry, and you're moving into this home where when I sat down with Lonnie and he told me how extensive it was in terms of rules that you're supposed to remember on not mixing meat and dairy, and what types of meat you can and can't eat, and certain items of clothing that people were expected to wear, like under their clothes, and all sorts of different things that he went through. I was saying to him, I was so overwhelmed with the level of information that I don't know how people can remember all of the things. And I understand that you're taught at a very young age upwards, if you're part of that community, all of the things that are expected of you in terms of how you eat and how you dress and all of those things. But you're 10 and you're going from not having a kosher diet to being expected to adopt the kosher diet. So how did that feel for you, having all of these things laid on you about how you were now expected to eat and whatnot?
Well, it was only in the house that I was expected to eat that way. Outside at my school lunch, I could eat whatever I wanted. it was just, I mean, so basically it was like very high level is how it was, pretty much we don't bring food into the house from other restaurants, there's only maybe 5 or 6 kosher restaurants in the overall Chicago area at the time. So, it was pretty much, we don't bring this food into the house. It's not done. And, these are the dishes if you're eating meat, these are the dishes if you're eating milk. And so I
Right.
think most of it was high level and, obviously, and it wasn't a big, like, if I would have brought a candy bar or something that doesn't touch dishes into the house, that wasn't really an issue.
Okay.
If it was
Okay.
something that, if as long as it was something that wasn't using dishes or anything like that, it wasn't really an issue. But we'd still go out to non-kosher restaurants, and no, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't until like when I got into high school that I started deciding I wanted to do these things.
Oh,
That
interesting. Okay. When you when you've moved into this new home, that the different items of clothing that I just mentioned, you weren't expected to then start wearing all of those things.
No, my stepbrothers did, but I didn't.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Nothing was really nothing. I mean, nothing was really. It was just kind of like that. It was basically like a mutual respect type thing of the only time it came up on the like on the Sabbath. So if they were there, I wouldn't, I couldn't watch TV, but I could I couldn't watch TV in the main room at least. But it's like if I have the TV on, if I'm in my room and the TV was on, they shouldn't be, they can't come, they come in, they need to just accept that the TV's on.
So you reach high school age, and how does this next transition happen where you decide that you want to be further involved in perhaps the Orthodox side of Judaism?
Okay, well, this is where when I was about, so it was about when I was 14, so a freshman, 9th grade in high school. It was more like it was mostly out of a social thing. My parents wanted me to try a Jewish youth group. And I tried the conservative Jewish youth group, which was NAIR, and it just was, the kids just weren't very friendly. It was just I was warned that it was going to be snobbish.
Yeah.
But they exceeded that expectation. That somebody actually looked at the label of my shirt and told me that the brand was okay.
Oh my goodness! What came up to you, checked that your clothes were kosher?
Yeah. I mean, it was like, and my mother warned me. She's like, wear one of your brand name, shirts or whatever.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So obviously that place wasn't very welcoming.
I wonder what interactions your mum has had with those particular people for her to know that was the experience that you were going to have. It kind of makes me wonder if she's had similar interactions with that particular community group that have left her a little bit like wary of the more conservative Jewish people. So you tried that, it didn't work out, and then
I went to there was another youth group that a step cousin of mine who was from Israel, and in Israel, all men and all males and females go to the army. Men for 3 years, females for 2 years, unless they're all Israeli citizens. Now, religious females in Israel can get an exemption from the army to do national service instead, because could be religious issues with the army. So it's a very controversial thing. I mean, there are actually guys who get out of the army too in Israel. That's its own separate world. But
well, how do they put this forward to everybody? What are the reasons that they give behind sending people into the armed forces? Do they have like how do they preface this? Do you know at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, we'll probably get to. I mean, I lived in Israel for 6 years as an adult, but I was not in the army because I went there older. Because
Right.
I was already in my mid 20s when I went there. So always been under, because there's always been a threat. I mean, just because
Yes.
they've always been at war, so they've always needed a army.
It didn't even occur to me to question where the members of those armies come from, and it kind of makes sense now that you've said that, but it still really shocked me to hear somebody actually say, well, everybody is just expected to join and go and contribute somehow.
Every male for 18 for 3 years, every female for 2 years. There are the females, so that males can get an exception if they're going to be in religious learning, but it's a very controversial issue, and it's one of those things that because of the parliamentary system over in Israel, it's what keeps the religious parties have enough power that they're able to keep it, that there's these exceptions for people who want to study all day, but it's still. And then there are like special units for the more orthodox, more religious people.
Right.
But so the females who are religious, who don't want to do the army, this national service program, so they do for 2 years, and it's whatever, working at a school, working at a hospital, and then, but some of them will come, and some of them might come and spend a year like in another country, kind of like as a representative, like for Israeli outreach, just to like work with the schools. So the step cousin of mine, she was doing that for a year, and she was in America, and she volunteered one time as an advisor for this Orthodox youth group. I was on their mailing list, and she suggested I go. So it was purely, again, just a social outlet. And this is where, this group, this is where what I later learned to know was, that they were using cult tactics,
right,
to push their things. And that's what I didn't know it. So, I called up somebody from one of the flyers saying I was like interested in going to this event.
Yeah.
And didn't know the term love bombing then, but was pretty much what I encountered was this guy's like, oh, okay, you want to come? I'll pick you. Where do you live? Come pick you up at this time, take you to the event. And he picks me up and brings me there, and this is, this guy's a senior in high school. I'm a freshman, takes me there, introduces me to all these people. They're all nice. And after that experience I just had with the person looking at my clothing label, this fell, I got, liked it, and met a lot of people. So, then they would have conventions a few times a year that you'd go away for like 3-4 days to some area, and would just be their programming. And that's where it was through this organization and this group that I ended up becoming more religious. Now, obviously, I saw it all in my home. So for me, these weren't foreign or strange practices, but it was just more like I was coming to do them, except doing them.
You're picked up by this really nice, warm person who's like, yeah, I'll come and pick you up. He gets you to the place that he introduces you to everybody. You said that you went just for the social aspect. So straight away with him kind of like, yeah, let me introduce you to everybody. You're like, wow, this is super social and everyone's really lovely and nice. Nobody's checking my clothing to see how much money I spend on my attire. This is great. So what happens after that? Are you kind of gently encouraged to start adopting the kosher diet more seriously, to start wearing traditional Jewish clothing? Talk us through kind of the small steps that you go through to reach kind of being super religious.
Okay, well, I mean, I have a lot of experience because I spent 4 years, pretty much, well, 3.5 years of high school in this group. And then I volunteered with them for about 10 years extensively.
Ooh, okay,
So,
wow, a long time.
This actually became a significant part of my life, even as an adult, doing volunteer work. So I go there. So really the way they do it is the events that they hold events at the local level. And those are more just about the fun, ice skating, roller skating,
right,
things like that, just general, maybe, going to some play, activity, just general teenage type stuff that they do.
Yep.
And there might be, there'll be some religious, they'll do some religious aspect, like somebody will like give a little like Torah story at the end of every meal.
Okay.
And they'll do like the grace after meals, but they really try to downplay the religion. They really try to downplay the religion at some of these events to get people to be interested.
Right. And to keep coming back. Yeah.
Then they do these conventions. It was around 4 times a year that they would have these major ones. And at the time, probably maybe 100, 150 kids. Because the area was just Chicago and Milwaukee, and were the area. So all throughout the Chicagoland area, and Milwaukee was the region that we covered. It was a national group.
Okay.
It's called NCSY. It's the National Conference of Synagogue Youth. It's run by the Orthodox Union, which is one of the large Jewish organizations in America. And this is their youth group. And so these conventions will be like 3-4 days. They'll start like Thursday night. You'll probably take a bus. Like the first one I went to was in Toronto. And, we took a bus from Chicago to Toronto, whatever, like
wow.
12, 13 hours. And we all were, that one we were all sleeping. We were sleeping on the floor. The guys were all sleeping on the floor of a synagogue. And the girls were staying in homes and people in the community who volunteered that their homes.
Right.
So we'd go there in the convention. So they'd start. So Friday would always be like some fun type activity, something low key, non-religious. Then Friday night is where, before the Sabbath, is where stuff starts picking up. And they'll begin with this, they called it the, pre-Sabbath spirit. And they would be, dancing and singing, and, they'd have a band at these, a small band, keyboard player, drummer, and singer they'd have at these conventions. And so people would be, singing and dancing. Then there'd be a little story. So, definitely, again, what I later learned, trying to get into a bit of a trance-like state.
Yep.
And so then they would do the services Friday night. They would do the Sabbath meal Friday nights, and then there'd be like some sort of fun activity, games, some sort of, obviously it was religious, so couldn't use electronics, couldn't use that, but some sort of games or something like that. And they tried to keep it very scheduled, obviously. Not a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
And then Saturday then Saturday there would be Saturday morning there'd be the services, and that was the full 2 hour. They did have an explanatory service, so if you didn't want to sit through that, you could go. It was like an hour or something, and it was somebody talking. So I usually actually would do that for most of the time. But one thing with this, we kind of touched on the services, is Orthodox Judaism. There's prayers every day. 3 times a day there are prayers. There are the morning prayers, which, if you're going to a service, will probably be somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes.
Right.
And then there's an afternoon and evening prayer, which are about 15, 20 minutes. Now, so they would do all the prayers, but it was very low key. It was, they weren't forcing you to do, they like stand there, say privately to God what you want, you can speak English, do your thing. They weren't really forcing it. And then where it would be, so then, so Saturday morning, there'd be the services, then there'd be lunch, then there'd be some free time, maybe, there might be some like Torah discussion group or something. And then Saturday, towards the end of Sabbath, they have the first one where it really starts, you'll have everyone sitting around in a circle. This is on chairs.
Right.
And everyone's sitting around in the circle and, singing a lot of slow songs more there, but singing, and kind of then somebody will be giving some story. And then they'll start calling out people who have made their small commitments to the, religion.
Okay.
Like they'll be like, John Doe has decided this week, he came and told me that he is going to start saying a blessing, before he eats a candy bar.
Okay.
Or, something like this. Or, somebody is going to start wearing the undergarment that men wear, they're called tzitzit, with it's like an undershirt, sleeveless undershirt, like a poncho that has these specially tied fringes on it. So they'll call out like a handful of these things, and and then you'll go back singing some more songs, maybe another slight story. Then you go and do the service at the end of the Sabbath, the evening service. Then you come back and you come into this room for, there's a service that all Orthodox Jews do, that's called the Havdalah, which is done on Saturday night to signify the end of the Sabbath.
Okay.
To separate between the holy and the mundane. And it's like a 2-minute prayer thing with a candle and some wine and spices. It's very quick. It's actually a nice custom. It's not anything. It's actually kind of a nice custom. What's the thing? Right. But what they would do is, so you'd be in this room. It's all dark. The band is playing, and kind of like a slow upbeat.
In the dark. Okay.
In the dark, and there'd be the one big candle that was used for the actual service. Then they would give maybe, about 10, 20 candles to people to recognize them, but it was like a secret, the reason they were giving it to them. Like, they didn't say why they were giving it to them, but, if somebody was holding a candle, that was a sign that they obviously did something or were doing something.
So were you hopeful to be like given one of these candles? Were you like, hopefully they'll give one to me? Okay.
Yeah, people would. Early on I didn't, because nobody knew me, but later on, people would kind of be like, oh, who's they going to choose, or things like that. So they'd give the candles, and then they'd be singing these songs, and it was a co-ed youth group, but it was by Orthodox standards. So the males and females did not touch each other.
Right.
There was no physical contact. Depending on how Orthodox, but many Orthodox will not have any sort of physical contact with somebody of the opposite sex, to include even shaking hands.
Right.
Some of them will not, that varies, but some of them will not even shake hands. Most people, most more modern Orthodox in America, if like somebody of the opposite gender extends their hand, they will shake their hand because they don't want to embarrass the person.
Right.
But there are people who won't even do that. And so the dancing is all separate. So it's the men together and the girls together.
Okay.
And things like that, and the swaying. So everyone's got their arms around each other, but again, it's the guys and the girls separate. And you're sitting there swaying and singing these slower type songs. And then there'll be this emotional story. Usually, I'd say 90% of the time connected to the Holocaust, and it'll always be one of these, like, miraculous type, the person who miraculously got saved,
Right.
the
Right.
last minute, the person who was supposed to be the one, there's this classic one that they actually said a lot of times was, these people, there was these roles, it was towards the end, and there was these really, these roles that they put out that looked really good. And this one guy, he got knocked over his head and somebody stole his role. And when he woke up, he saw everyone else was dead, that the rolls were poisoned, and that, he was saved. Of course, it doesn't say why the other people, weren't worthy of, one of those type of stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like these ones you hear about, the ones you hear about the person who, didn't make it to the plane that crashed or something like that. But
yeah.
What about the 300 others?
Yes, and I was just thinking that in my mind as soon as you mentioned the Holocaust. I was thinking, whatever way those stories are spun, what about the millions of others?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with those stories. So it'd always be something like that, and then so that would be Saturday night. Then so they would end the Sabbath. Then there'd be some sort of fun activity, and Sunday morning. Well, okay, depending if the convention was ending Sunday, then later Saturday night there would be a kumsitz where everyone would, and this I thought was a bit culty when I was doing it.
Right. Okay.
A bunch of teenagers sitting around in a huge circle with candles placed around, dark room. And again, it would be there'd be like the official, somebody giving some stories. They'd sing a song. All these, these were all Jewish songs. They'd sing the song, and then you'd have people who would speak. Like, somebody would like give something like, when I first came here, I was, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know what it meant to be Jewish. And now I'm going to, start doing, I decided I'm going to start doing this.
Okay.
So it was all about the baby steps, it was all about start picking up the small steps and moving that along. So this would be either Saturday night or whatever the last night of the convention was, they would do this. And this was a total, you'd have people sometimes, especially like the last one of the year, you'd have people in tears, you'd have people talking about, some people were talking about, tragedies in their life and how then this, brought them. And, this would happen about 4 times a year.
Each time you went, do you feel like you became more and more orthodox in your practices around Judaism?
A bit. I definitely a little bit. And again, like, it was like some of it, and I think I was more accepting of some of the things that, went on in the house. Like I was, more willing to go to services, and it wasn't as much a drag, or, it wasn't as much like I wasn't bothered by that. But it wasn't really until my senior year, I got very involved. I would go to every event. My junior year of my sophomore, so my second year there, I ran for the, chapter board. So I was like the chapter vice president or something.
Okay.
And then my junior year, I was the chapter president. And then my senior year, I wanted to run for the regional president. And that's where the director of the group said that I wasn't allowed to run for this position if I wasn't keeping the Sabbath and keeping kosher.
Okay, so the person that is telling you this himself is Orthodox Jewish.
Yes, he's a rabbi. He's a rabbi who was in charge of this was his full-time job, was in charge of this group.
Right.
And he told me that if I wanted to run, and I said that I brought up I knew that somebody else wasn't. I knew that the previous year the person wasn't because they were in my high school and I was friends with them. And he said it was a new rule that I had to do. And we actually were arguing about it. And finally I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll keep Shabbat and kosher. And I said, and he said, yeah, he knew I was ready. I just wasn't, able to, ready to put, final, make the commitment. So that's when I decided that, okay, I'm going to start doing this. And the Sabbath came pretty easy. That I started doing, so wouldn't drive from Friday night to Saturday night, wouldn't use electronics. Now, if the TV was on in the house, I would watch it. I mean, if there was something I wanted to, if somebody turned on the TV and I wanted to watch it, I would watch it. I wasn't that, the keeping kosher, I tried, but I wasn't able to actually do it.
Okay. And is it because there was so much to learn, or was it just because it was too difficult to change your lifestyle so severely at that point?
It was just too difficult to change. It was just too difficult. The Sabbath thing was fine because by this point, most of my friends were all people from this youth group.
Right.
Even to this day, my two closest friends in the world were people I met in this youth group.
Okay.
So I mean, and most of my friends that I have any actual, outside of that I chat with on occasional Facebook, but the people that I actually talk to in my life are all people I met through this group. So I think that the Sabbath was just an easy because, well, also there was the social aspects of the Sabbath because people would invite you to their house.
Yeah.
To come
if it was in walking distance, of course.
Well, or to stay with them, or yes. A lot of Orthodox Jews have a guest room because they want people to be able to come and stay with them for the Sabbath. So I mean, so it was so that was I think the keeping kosher, I think it just was too hard when I just was surrounded by, when the choices were so limited because it just would mean I couldn't go to any fast food restaurant. And, I'm 17 years old. Where am I? The only kosher restaurant, the closest kosher restaurant is 25 minutes away and is like a sit down restaurant. So,
yeah.
So I think it was just it was just the key. It was just too much to actually accept.
What about wearing the undergarments? Is that something that you applied to your life at that point?
I did at age 17. I started. Somebody gave one of the advisors from the group gave me a pair of them. I did also start probably when I was maybe about 16. Yeah, I'd say about 16 because I was driving. I did start maybe learning Torah one night a week with somebody for an hour. We'd go, somebody who was studying to be a rabbi Me and a friend of mine, we'd go and we'd learn together with this
Okay.
guy. I mean, just on an informal basis, but I would do that. And somebody gave me a pair of the the undergarment,
Seat
and I
seat,
did
that's
start.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Seat
and
seat.
I did start to wear them, and the only actually I think I started maybe my junior year, so I might have started before that actually. I don't because the only reason I'm not sure. The only reason no, I might have whatever. The only reason I remember specifically starting to wear those is because changing for gym class in the locker room, um, I was always a little nervous about it and would try to take them off really quickly when, with my shirt or something, or trying to think of what to say if
Right.
somebody said, "What are those things?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's something that not people, aren't familiar with. So, so yeah, I
There's
did start wearing
loads
those.
of stuff here. Let me just go back to a few things to find out
Sure.
some key moments in some of these experiences you've spoken about. First of all, when you adopted these new lifestyle changes into your life to appease the rabbi, did he give you the position that you were after all of this effort that you
Oh
went to?
yes, yeah. I mean, there was an election, but the guy I was running against, we actually agreed to do it as a joint presidency.
Oh, very
Um,
diplomatic.
because we were very close friends and we the same friend group, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with having to choose between one of
Okay.
us, and so we agreed to do a joint presidency. But and I'm not. I mean, this guy was more about. They wanted him more as the role model guy, and I was more the actual one doing. I was the one in the office, making phone calls, getting people
Mm-hmm.
to events. I was doing more of that stuff,
Right.
and he was more just,
The
this really
face
loud.
of the campaign.
Yeah, exactly. He was this, loud, really outgoing. I
Yeah.
mean, he is now extremely religious, but
He's
so
like the
we
lead
didn't.
singer and you're the sound technician behind all
Yeah.
of the
So,
vocals and all of that stuff. Okay, interesting, interesting. And what about when you're at this camp? When are you ever called out for a small commitment? Do you remember the first time that happened for you?
I don't really. I mean, I think mine was more like asking for like, I think it was like maybe I requested like, there's somebody who offered to, that if there was a Jewish book you want, like he would buy you the book. And
Okay.
I think like I asked for like a book to start learning. I think it was more along I think my stuff was more along the learning side than the
Yeah, yeah.
actual doing.
And
Um,
what about the whole rituals with the candles? Do you remember the first time you were given a candle in one of these ceremonies?
that I don't remember. I mean, that it's also possible that they could also give it trying to inspire you, to want to do it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I know I was given a couple of times. I don't really remember because eventually I was the guy pretty much passing out the candles.
Right. Okay. Okay.
But so then my senior year is when I started, and then I decided my senior year of high school that I wanted to go spend a year studying in Israel, doing religious studies after I graduated. It's like a gap year, which is very common, which is something I now know is trying to hook people in and solidify their religious commitments, because they're afraid that if you graduate and go off to college somewhere, you likely will stop doing whatever you were doing. You go to Israel to a completely religious environment for a year, that's obviously going to reinforce things.
Yes, and in the interview I did with Lonnie, they had an expression for people who went away to Israel and came back really extra committed to their faith. And I can't remember the expression off the top of my head. Something like, "Do you think they're going to come back and they've fallen out or something along those lines?" Like
flip out? Was it flip
yeah,
out?
flipped them. I think it might be that. Yeah. Oh, do you think they flipped out at like super spiritual, really into the faith, coming back and proselytizing to everybody and spreading the good word? So yeah, I really looking forward to hearing about this next chapter.
Okay, so and as far as going to Israel for the year, my family, my stepfather, his brother had lived in Israel, since the late 1970s. His mother his mother lived in Israel, and he had a real strong love of Israel. So there was no issue with me wanting to, that wasn't an issue at all about me wanting to go spend a year in Israel. The only thing is they would have preferred me to go more to a college program. There's college programs there that have American programs for a 1-year American program, but I wanted to go more for the Jewish studies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you been learning any Hebrew in this time? In the when you go to the youth groups and Hebrew school, do you have enough in your?
Very little. Hebrew school is really about reading. It's more about reading Hebrew to be able to say the prayers or read the Torah.
So
it's not about actually speaking.
Right. Okay.
It's very basic. I could say yes, no, hello, goodbye. Very, very basic type stuff at that point.
So you go over there, and what are your first sort of impressions of the environment, the communities, the culture?
It was first I had to select the program, and I found this one that was very popular among this youth group. A lot, they took, that was their target market was kids who became religious in this youth group, was a lot of their target market.
Okay.
And it was a small school, I think maybe 50, 60 guys. And it was so I went there, and there was a good friend of mine was also from Chicago, was going there. And then there was also a couple of other people that I had met through some of the large national NCSY, the organizational conventions.
Right.
So I did know a few people. And, but, so got to Israel, and, went there, and it was definitely a culture shock. Now, because this was all day religious studies. We'd wake up at 7 a.m. for morning services, from 7 to 8 or so, morning services. Then we'd have breakfast, and after breakfast it would start, so 9 a.m. we'd start learning. And the way the religious male learning is set up usually is that you'll learn with a partner. You have a learning partner that you'll go over stuff with for, a couple of hours, and preparing for the class, and then you'll go into the class.
Okay.
So you spend a couple of hours with a partner, you guys discuss reading the stuff, discussing it, and then you go into the actual class with the rabbi.
Okay.
So, we would do that until so that would be until 1 o'clock, was the schedule was, then we'd have a 2-hour break for lunch. and then come back in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, we'd have classes, somewhere on different Jewish history, but all from a very religious perspective.
Okay.
We'd have classes until dinner time. We'd do dinner. That would have an hour. That would be the evening prayers. And then we would come back and learn for like 2 more hours. So
my goodness.
From like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. was almost like the day.
Whoa. And you had that I know Friday through to Saturday, the
So
timetable will be
Sunday,
different.
It was Sunday through Thursday. Because Israel, the weekend is Friday, Saturday. In general, for even the non-religious in Israel, the Israeli work week is Sunday through Thursday.
So
is the standard Israeli work week.
That is, so you're over doing this program. It's a 1-year program, and so you're doing these 7 till 10 days, and it's like, I just want to point out as well that at meal times there are certain prayers that are supposed to be said. When you have bread, Lonnie explained that there's quite an extensive prayer that needs to be read if there's bread at the meal, and all of these added extras depending on what's included with what you're eating at the table. So even during those 2-hour food breaks, 1-hour food breaks, there's still a lot of faith related things that are supposed to happen. And then on your days off, they are only days off because you are doing the religious practice of observing the Sabbath, which is also a faith related activity.
And if I recall correctly, we actually did. We have the services Friday morning, so we were required. We had the services Friday morning. How it worked is we had the services Friday morning, and we might have had some learning, and then every other week, you were required to stay there for the Sabbath. So every other week there would be Sabbath programming. So
you really are just thrown into this life of every minute is geared towards strengthening your faith, basically.
Absolutely.
That is so intense.
No, they try to keep you. And at the time that I was there wasn't a curfew. They did do that later, but bars were off limits. There was a lot of rules. Bars and clubs were off limits. And there was a couple of rabbis who would actually go out at night and would start strolling around the popular bars looking for people.
Oh my goodness me.
No, this was a known, so you couldn't go to and they did allow you to talk with girls at this one, but you couldn't, if a girl called there, this was 1991, so we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
There was one phone. If a girl called, they wouldn't take a message from her. They wouldn't take the message if it was a girl. They wouldn't encourage, but they'd allow you to talk to girls, but they wouldn't take a message or anything like that, or it couldn't be around the school. It had to be in the center of Jerusalem or something.
When you are in this environment and there's no curfew, but if your days are finishing at 10 o'clock and you go home and then you need to wind down and then you need to actually get to sleep, and then you have to, you know that you've got an early start the next day. So I doubt that a lot of people would be, me, this is just me personally, because I really enjoy a good night's sleep. I imagine a lot of people wouldn't even be entertaining the idea after such a long day and having such an early start of maybe going out all hours of the night. I mean, some people I'm sure do that.
I mean, I would do it, maybe the first, it's like the first couple of weeks because the novelty. I mean,
the rite of passage of going away,
being 18. I mean, especially coming from America, where the drinking age is 21, to be in a country where it's 18.
But also coming from America, it having those sorority and fraternity types of experiences and environments are very much part of what I perceive over here in England as traditional college experiences for typical Americans who are going through that period in their lives. Like we there's loads of films that are like Spring Break and all those types of things. So I'm sure that those first couple of weeks of kind of drinking, and you've spoken a lot about appreciating the social aspect of things as well. So of course, going over to a new place and going out and speaking to people and having those social experiences. But as the year goes on, it must be so
the year goes on.
Tiring to have those lengthy days.
No one goes out once that's mostly like a first month type thing. And then, I mean, occasionally, I think there was one afternoon we did have off, like every other week or there's something we'd have like Saturday night we were off, so we could get together. We're like, with friends Saturday night we were off. And like sometimes like Tuesday, I think it was, just random that it was Tuesday. Tuesday would be like the afternoon activity was like a tour. We'd go like touring for a couple of hours, like somewhere around Jerusalem. And then, so there were those things too. And they did a few overnight tours and stuff like that. So we did do some touring of Israel and things like that, but it was all from the religious perspective. It wasn't about going to, and there was like dress. We were not allowed to wear shorts in Jerusalem. There were dress codes, like no shorts allowed in Jerusalem.
What would happen? What would happen if you were wearing shorts?
I mean, all they'd probably do is tell you to put down pants. I mean, they didn't have a lot of. I mean, and the year I went there, I was there in 1991. Obvious Gulf War. I was there I was there after the Gulf. But the Gulf War really threw these schools off. So because most of the kids left when the Scud missiles started hitting in Israel. So
for anybody who isn't sure what the Gulf War was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The first when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and the U.S. George H.W. Bush sent American troops there to liberate Kuwait. And I think it was around January when he went in there, when he started there in Kuwait. The Iraqis started shooting Scud missiles into Israel. And so obviously due to the threat, most of the American programs got shut down because parents obviously don't want their kid in Israel if they don't have to be there. So the year I was there was kind of a bit of an off year for all these schools because they lost a lot of revenue from their tuition from the previous year. Their schools weren't operating. It just was so the year I was there was overall just kind of considered a bit of a odd year for these schools. But so, I mean, there wasn't really much the school was going to do, but they had something over my head. I wanted to attend Yeshiva University, which is a Orthodox Jewish university in New York.
Okay.
And there's two Jewish universities in the United States. There's others that are like, have programs, but this Yeshiva University is completely it has Jewish studies. It's a dual curriculum of Jewish studies and secular studies. And it actually is a, decent university. It actually is ranked academically.
Right. It's when a lot of people talk about BYU, the Brigham Young University, for the LDS community, Mormon. I suppose.
This is the equivalent.
Right, yeah.
This is the Jewish equivalent to that. And based on my high school grades, I was not initially accepted. But if you spend the year in Israel and do well there, they pretty much will accept you. Is one of their things. It's an unwritten rule that you go to Israel, you spend the year studying in Israel, and
we'll take
they hear good things about you. So honestly, that's what kept me like following everything, never missing a class, never doing that, was because I wanted to go to this school and my grades weren't good enough.
Okay.
And the only way I was going to get in was if I had a good report from the rabbis. When the admissions director came.
And when you do attend this university that is geared towards the Jewish community, are you then expected to carry on things like wearing the seats and things like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've actually, since like the, leaving the, religious, I actually have done a lot of, we've actually been going back listening, but like listening, I've listened to a lot of the ex-Mormon podcasts and listened to a lot because I actually find a lot of connection between the Mormon community and the American modern Orthodox Jewish community.
Yeah.
I notice a lot of similarities. So I've actually like Mormon Stories and some of the other popular, I've like listened to a lot of the podcasts. And what I've actually found interesting is where I went was actually a lot more liberal than BYU.
Right.
Like as far as actual rules, where BYU has the honor code and is so strict about enforcing things.
Yeah. They've got that whole thing around the LGBT community going on right now as well.
I mean, the thing with the Jewish school is that they were receiving federal funding. So they were they were subject to certain discrimination laws because they did receive federal funds.
Right.
So, and obviously they were a Jewish school of 1,000 people, not like the Mormon church that has a lot more money and power and controls the state of Utah.
Yes.
So they don't, you're expected to do these things, but it's not as enforced. The services, no one's checking if you're at the services or not at Yeshiva University or YU. I mean, it's pretty much, it's more the social pressure of doing it.
Right. Okay. So would you say that your time in your mid-20s was when you were most committed to Orthodox Judaism in terms of the practices that you were taking on board in your everyday life?
Yeah. No, that was definitely, that's definitely when it was. Israel definitely did it for me. That's where I started keeping all the laws much stricter. I did start keeping kosher, and when I came back, like, I would not go to the synagogue where my parents went to because that wasn't religious enough for me.
Whoa, okay. I wonder how that must have felt for them to hear that from you. Like, oh no, I can't.
They understood it because like most of their friends think their kids said the same thing. So
right, okay.
It was a common. We'd all go to the little Chabad house, or the other group that started. We'd all go there.
Right. Okay.
So
you come back and you flipped out, and
yes. I mean,
And
well, I didn't flip out as much as they would have liked. They were really trying to get me to stay a second year. They really
oh,
wanted me to
okay.
spend a second year in Israel, and I just had no issue. I just had no interest in doing it. I was just
Okay.
ready to start life. I was ready to go to college. They tried getting me not to go to Yeshiva University. They wanted me to go to a more religious program and things like that. But I basically didn't want that and knew where I wanted to go and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wanted to get life started. I mean, that's the thing. I didn't fully flipped out would mean people who, then decide they want to spend their whole life, studying, religious studies or things like that. I mean, whereas I still wanted to get out working and things like that.
And carry on having those social
Yeah.
experiences that have driven you
So,
mostly up until this point.
yeah.
Okay.
So
So would you say that a year in that type of environment, you've come home and you've already said that you started to attend a different synagogue, you went to a different meeting up of separate to your parents. Is it difficult to break those routines and habits that you are kind of placed into for a year to come back to a life where it's not expected of you, but you have the choice? Is it hard to?
there were some challenges because most of my extended family does not observe this. So most of my extended family, so it would mean going to family events and either we'd bring our own food, like we would go to my aunt's house for dinner and bring our own food and sit
Okay.
there and eat with them, or things like that. So there was definitely a lot of adjustment like that. But again, my family was familiar with it because of my stepfather. He didn't hold it as strictly, but his practices, they were still
Yeah.
they were familiar with it. There was definitely some awkwardness, but it's hard to some of like there definitely was like my grandfather really didn't get it that much, and he'd be like, let's go out to eat here, and I'm like, I can't eat there anymore, and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
like things like that. So there was definitely, yeah, no, there definitely was. Um, but I was only dealing with that in the, summer, breaks and things like that. So for those first
Okay.
few years.
And at what point does your commitment to your faith start to wind down a little bit and you take a step back from kind of maybe practicing so often the amounts of rituals that you've been included in your life?
Um, well, in 2000 and I moved to Israel in 2001. Um, lived there for religious reasons. I mean, believed that that there was a religious belief to settle the land of Israel.
Okay.
And I moved there. That's where I met my wife there. She's American, but she was also an American who moved there.
Okay.
And got married, and our daughter was born, and we decided we wanted to move back to America to be closer to family.
Yep.
And also I was working for an American company there, but I knew my job wasn't that long. I knew that the company was things were shutting down. So I didn't think I knew I'd need to find a new job. So we
Right.
decided, let's just go back to America.
Okay.
Um,
Yep.
we came back to America, and, about 3 weeks later, the mortgage crisis starts and the economy starts to fall apart in 2007, 2008.
Yep.
So we just moved back internationally. I'm working low end jobs, while still keeping all this stuff. I mean, and, it's like, I'm not going to, it's, and it was actually, in a lot of ways limiting myself because, like, especially being in Orlando, there's a lot of lower paid jobs in the, hospitality or,
Yep, yep.
but none of those because I knew I'd have to work on Saturday. So still keeping all of that. Then in 2009, I enlisted in the U.S. Army.
Okay.
Something I always was interested in doing. If I hadn't gone religious in high school, I probably would have, there was a good chance I would have gone military after high school.
Okay, yeah.
But it was, and then also just due to the, finding a job. So I went into the Army, and I knew I'd have to make religious sacrifices in the Army, but I could justify it because there is a belief in saving life and national defense and those type of things being exceptions to some of these roles. So I go to basic training, and at basic training, I pretty much ate a vegetarian diet. So I didn't eat anything that was biblically kosher.
Right.
Biblically prohibited. So I'll only eat vegetarian and would do what I could, on the Sabbath. And, just basically, but it was like, okay, this is, what needs to be done. I don't, especially once I'm in, I don't have a choice.
Yeah,
so at this point. So I'd say that was really the kind of the start of things, because I started breaking some of those habits in the Army, because then it was really when I got to my first duty station in the Army. We were doing things, but it was kind of like, I'm like, well, I've been eating like certain non-meat products out anyway, in the Army. So why don't we just do that in our life? Because we were living in Colorado. So there wasn't really kosher restaurants or things like that. So our house was kosher, but we started, go through the occasional drive-through and get something that wasn't meat or something. And even through, I deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, 2011, and kept as much as I could while there.
Right.
Obviously there was things, but, I was, keeping the Sabbath to some extent, was not eating any of the meat for the most part. And then it just got to, and then when I came back, is when I started, once I came back from there, and then I ended up moving to Virginia. And that's when stuff started to, get loose a little more.
Okay.
And it was just a gradual type, and it wasn't really as much about, I didn't really think much about belief. It was just kind of these habits were broken, and, my conditioning changed. And so it was more like eating in non-kosher restaurants, but not eating anything that was actually, really, I wouldn't eat meat or, pork or anything like that. And so that was really, would try to keep the Sabbath. In that point in the Army, my last 3 years, I was in a administrative role. So I pretty much was like in an office job that was Monday through Friday. And, so it wasn't really an issue. But, it was like one of those things that normally would keep the Sabbath. But if there was something we really wanted to do that was on Saturday, we'd go and do it.
So at this point, you've almost gone full circle since like 10 years old to this point in your life.
And then I decided that, for the high holidays, for the religious services, I actually went to the chapel on the Army post. I went there, which was not an Orthodox service, but, just didn't, was like done with staying at some Orthodox home, somebody's home. And so I drove to the services and, did that. So, kept all the, still was keeping the stuff to some level. And a lot of it was very, I won't say there wasn't really a lot of conscious decisions. It was more like, okay, well, and then I would say probably around 2014, 2000. I got out of the Army in 2000, early 2015. And I would just say I started getting into, various podcasts and stuff like that. And that's where I started hearing the, traditional, the Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and started hearing these people talk, and stuff started to question.
Right.
This doesn't make sense. So it was pretty much, 2015, by 2015, 2016, I ended up, just because of so used to it, I ended up pretty much becoming vegetarian because I was so used to eating a vegetarian diet.
Right.
So I ended up just kind of becoming a vegetarian, having nothing to do with religion. So a lot of stuff wasn't really an issue, but definitely when I got out of the Army and moved to Florida, I wasn't keeping the Sabbath, but I was kind of closeted as far as my religious, people thought. And it just gradually got that, like, I was realizing I was believing less and less and doing less and less. And I mean, I think that it was probably around 2018, maybe 2017. Well, I will say then 2000, with the change in administration in this country in 2017, and seeing how religious people were responding to things, is what really got me to be more aggressive in my feelings of wanting to separate myself.
Okay.
I didn't like the response, and how I felt that things that religious people, it's for, all these years, about hearing about how the U.S. turned away boats of people trying to escape Europe, and then religious Jews mocking people trying to escape other situations and trying to come to America, and just seeing the, racism and the things like that, and then also just seeing the, misogyny and stuff like that, really, I mean, unfortunately, 2000, when things changed in America, it gave a lot of these people permission to be what they always were and be open about a lot of their feelings that were not shared. And I think it was just, that's what really pushed me to, like, okay, I can't.
Yeah.
Agree with this.
I feel at that point you don't want to align yourself with people that have those beliefs and those feelings about other people and other community groups.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that was and there was a period during, especially my time in Israel, that I held very right-wing, extreme beliefs, as far as like Israel and anti-Arab feelings. And I had a lot of that. And I think that's what, in some ways, I think the Army, going to Afghanistan and really interacting with the locals there, not the Taliban, but the Muslims there, just realizing, these are just people trying to live their life, and, so I think that's where a lot of my religious stuff just started going, okay. And it got gradually more and more, and then, I mean, it started like a couple of, I told my parents knew what I told them, like they had known, like back in, when I was in the Army, but I just kind of kept it quiet around friends and stuff like that. Now, one of my good friends isn't religious. He was from that youth group, but he didn't stay religious.
No, that was going to be one of my next questions. Your lifelong friends that you met in the youth group, how many of them are still committed to their faith, and on what level?
I would say, I mean, definitely all my friends, a good number are still very strongly committed to the faith. I mean, because most of the people, I mean, the people I was friends with were more the people who were very involved in the group. And there was, but I mean, this one guy, this one friend of mine, he was never really, he didn't do the year in Israel or anything like that. So he never had the chance to flip out.
Right, yeah.
And, but it was one other friend of mine. I mean, he's very religious. And, you know, I finally had to say to him, I told him a few years ago, I said, you realize I'm not actually religious anymore. Like that, I did tell him that I felt the need to come out and tell
Okay,
him
yeah.
because it was getting, certain things were just becoming more and more obvious because where we were living, there wasn't a religious synagogue. My kids were going to public school, you know, stuff that just was becoming more obvious that,
Right, yeah, yeah.
you know, if pictures of, you know, family pictures, my daughter's wearing pants and shorts, not skirts like Orthodox girls,
Yeah,
you know, and my wife is wearing pants and things like that. So, you know, there's definitely, and that she didn't cover her, married religious women cover their hair. Their hair is considered, you know, something that should be kept for their husband only. So they wear hats and or wigs. So, you know, my wife wasn't doing that. I mean, she hadn't been doing that even when she had stopped doing that when we were still somewhat religious.
right.
But, you know, it was then, I'd say really the last couple of years is where I really kind of became definitely much more that I don't believe in any of this. I don't really believe in a divine creator. And if
Wow.
there is, I certainly don't believe that organized religion, that I don't believe that the creator of the world is micromanaging to the level that he cares, you know, who wants to love who and who wants to eat what, and,
Yes,
you
yeah.
know, that type of, you know, concept that, so, and I kept it quiet for a long time. I mean, a couple of years kept it in, and it finally hit a point of my mental health of having to pretend and be silent about it and worry about what I was, especially different people knew different things. You know, some people thought I was still religious, some knew I was, you know, not religious, but doing some things. And it was too much trying to keep it in. So in end of July, I decided that I was going to go public with my social go public that I was no longer believing. And I wrote a piece that I posted on Medium saying my, you know, things. And then I posted that to Facebook where I did give a few friends initial heads up that I was going to be doing this. So I didn't want to catch anyone, you know, totally by surprise.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I did give some people, but then I basically posted on Facebook that, you know, that I no longer, you know, believe. And I have to actually say that I was quite impressed with the response. I was prepared for some hatred. I was prepared for attacks. And for the most part, people were very supportive of it. I think most people, I think a lot of people had their feelings, and I do think that I got lucky on Facebook that the nice people got into the comments first. So some of the people who probably would be nasty probably didn't want to do that
Right,
after a
yeah,
couple of
yeah.
nights, but for the most part, people were very supportive and like, you know, hey, you know, you do your thing. And even I mean, I'm sure behind my back there's people, but nobody, but overall, it was actually very supportive, the comments I got from people.
I feel like a lot of the holier than thou attitude is territory that comes with any type of religion, no matter how much people are committed. It seems to be something that just comes with the territory, from my experience of speaking to various people. But just to go back on a few things you've mentioned in your kind of that particular part of your journey, you talked about realizing during the election in the 2016, 17, 18 period in time that you'd become fed up with some of the more religious messages that were coming through in America at that time. And one of the words you used was misogyny. And then later on, you talked about how your wife at that point, at some point in your journey, was no longer wearing wigs and covering her hair and things like that. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what we mentioned towards the start of the episode about the differences for women growing up as Orthodox Jewish women, and perhaps some of the experiences that your wife may have had living over in Israel?
So, I mean, Orthodox women, again, like everything with this, there's the spectrum. But if you go in the, most of the modern, I mean, there's some in the modern Orthodox world who, so women will wear pants occasionally, they will wear them, but generally they're going to wear skirts. How long the skirt is again going to vary. I mean, some will just wear it that it covers the knee. Some are wearing them down to the ankles. The laws of modesty for women are extreme. That, I mean, among Orthodox, the more stringent Orthodox, I mean, it comes to that their elbows should be covered, no neckline, things like that. And then once they're married, that they start covering their hair, because only their husband is supposed to see their hair, or things like that. There's a lot of variances. I mean, some will, some women would show, like, and my wife never wore a wig. She wore hats, and
okay.
We were in Israel when she was doing it, so it obviously was more acceptable. And she would have some hair sticking out, but some people will not have like a strand of hair sticking out. And girls, I mean, I'd say from a pretty young age, probably from starting school at least, that girls are going to be wearing skirts. That
okay.
Even before they're 12, when they're officially considered that they have to do it, that they'll probably be wearing skirts from a very young, from 5, 6, that they'll be wearing skirts. They might wear pants if they're doing some sort of, activity, but no, but that's the thing, is then it limits all these activities that they can't do most sports, because, I mean,
I feel like
limited.
The whole of Judaism in these experiences that I'm hearing is just limitations on food, limitations on, like, even when you look at the kosher diet, you're still restricted on how you can combine things within that diet. And then you're limited on things you can do on certain days of the week at certain times, and you can't drive, so you're limited to where you live because you need to be within walking distance of certain places so that you can go and actually go to services and things like that. Then you're like limited on, Lonnie spoke about some people would leave their stoves on low because you can't actually and so I feel like a lot of the experiences that we are having explained to us on the show currently are all about just people limiting themselves, like women wearing skirts, and then that limits the experiences, the activities that they can be involved in, and women covering their hair, so that limits like them having nice hairstyles and going to the hairdressers and having those types of experiences. And it's I'm sure this is not universal across all experiences with Judaism. I'm sure a lot of people will listen to these episodes and say, well, I grew up Jewish, these are not my experiences, I don't feel I was limited in any way, I feel like my religion actually bolstered me and supported me. But these experiences are all subjective, and I'm coming from the outside looking in just on what I'm being told from these firsthand experiences. So I always like to make a point of that where we can. But going back on another point that you mentioned about certain behaviors of people, certain opinions of that people might have held that they kept close to their chest, and then began to kind of throw caution to the wind when the election happened in 2017. And that's around the, and then you said, people should just be able to love who they want to love, which leads me into the LGBT question that I usually ask on most of these episodes. And I wonder if you came across anybody that identified as a part of that community group, whether it was during your time in the youth group or Hebrew school or college, or during your time in Israel. Was there anybody you came across that identified in that way, that perhaps was more reserved because of the doctrine around the LGBT community?
Yeah, no, there definitely, I mean, I'd say it probably was later that I encountered it, because also, late 80s, early 90s, just in general society, this wasn't,
of course, yeah,
something that, was still the, I remember going to some family event where, somebody was introduced as somebody's really good friend, really close friend. And then, I find out that, that's their girl. So it was, so, I mean, I'd always kind of had a kind of a let people do their thing. Like, I'm not that, I don't really care. And I think I'd say my views on this were kind of on the edge of the community. For example, like, I just personally believe, in general, I truly believe in a separation of church and state, and don't believe my religious views should dictate the laws of the country. Even when I was at my most religious, I said that, for example, I always was fine with pro-choice. It wasn't with abortion rights. And it wasn't a voting issue for me. It wasn't something that made my decision. Obviously, also I'm a man. So, I mean, at the time, I mean, still am, but, didn't have women in my life the same way. I didn't understand so I was, but I always was okay with, that, because, again, it's like, what religion shouldn't be. I'd say the LGBTQ, I will say, I actually lived in Chicago for about 6 months, in an area in the city that was a little more of a modern religious area, that also was very much the center of the gay and lesbian area of Chicago.
Okay.
And I know that at that place, I know they there for the rabbi, when they interviewed rabbis, they asked that question. They said, we are in the middle of, the primary, at that time it was just, referred to as gay, lesbian, the LGBTQ. We're in that area, and there's going to be possible people who come to your synagogue that will be, and, how will you react? And that was one of the, and that eliminated a lot of people, because, like, they wanted a rabbi who was willing to be open to that.
Right.
I mean, I have encountered in Israel, I did encounter some people that, kept everything as far as being Orthodox, but, were, in homosexual relationships. I don't know. Again, it's not something people are going to talk a lot. I mean, I also know a couple of people who got married. One ended up, somebody who was a friend of mine who got married to somebody who was a very religious guy, and then, eventually became non-religious and came out that he was always gay. So, so there's definitely these people who are being pressured into marriage of opposite gender when it's not what they want. So
right, yeah, okay. One of the last things I wanted to just go over before I ask you if there's anything you think we've missed is that sometimes when I read a lot about spiritual abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, people that have been given diagnosis of cancer or multiple sclerosis or any of these things, a lot of the time there is a lot of stuff to read about how people don't want to be defined by the tragic things that have happened to them and the diagnosis that they have or whatever it is that they have experienced in their life that they are overcoming. And a lot of the time those discussions happen on this show as well. But when we talk about Judaism, I feel like it's really difficult to separate the Jewish community from historical events like the Holocaust. And I'm just wondering from an outsider's perspective, asking you as somebody who did grow up Jewish, do you feel like your identity is like intertwined with the Holocaust in a way that it can't be separated?
There definitely is, which is why, I mean, I know the the Reddit group. I actually don't like I don't actually like the ex-Jew label that much. I started to use it, but then I realized that I wasn't comfortable with it. I mean, I don't have an issue with it, but won't refer to myself as, usually if I'm identifying on that way in anywhere, I'd say that I'll say, like former Orthodox
right
Jew. I still do consider myself culturally Jewish, and do actually plan to continue to do certain practices for the historical and the culture, like the mythology, just as mythology and the tradition. And that was something I did cover, and I think that's part of why I was scared to speak out for so long, was that I know the sacrifice that's been made.
Absolutely.
And, what people have done. But again, I mean, it just, collective trauma, shouldn't keep keeping things, it's time to move forward. But no, that definitely was an issue of mine when deciding to speak out, was how to address that thing that I know that, because I mean, it's not removed. I mean, I've met plenty of Holocaust survivors. They're definitely among my Facebook friends. There's children of survivors. So I knew that people were going to see this, that were personally impacted. And yeah, no, it definitely was something. But again, I just felt that with the way with where things were going with the world, with the authoritarian, how religion conditions to authoritarian rule and blind obedience, and seeing how that affects people, how they're not even thinking, they're just going with what religious leaders have started telling them, and the threats towards America and other countries. That was what I said, okay, that outweighs the I mean, it's possible that things would have gone differently in 2016, that I would have been fine just living my life as a non-religious Jew. Just keeping it quiet and, telling people, yeah, I'm not really religious anymore. But it was this stuff that's gone on in the last few years, and the authoritarian and the control, that I felt that I had to speak out, and why I'm, willing to do things like, talk on things like this. It's what, I felt that there was actually, the benefit of me speaking out outweighed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though there's a historical persecution of the Jewish community and Judaism as a religion throughout history, there are obviously still elements within this religion itself that are extremely high demand, that there are control and coercion tactics being used within some of the groups that you experienced at the camp where you went away, and some of those very slow methods of indoctrination that are used, and then your year in Israel where your time is just all spent on becoming more and more involved in your faith, and so there's systematic elements of high demand controlling environments within this religion. But I just wanted to make a point of saying that this is not a reflection on the Jewish community overall.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, it's definitely not a reflection of the Jewish. And I mean, we're talking, the Jewish community, I don't know the numbers, but is very small. And we're dealing with a subset of I'd say this, I don't even know the numbers, but we're talking single digit percentage of the Jewish population that's believing this. I mean, even in Israel, even in the Jewish homeland, the majority of the people there are secular. They don't. Yeah. So
yeah, but when we talk about the persecution of Jewish people, then you've got there's not just the 1941 to 45 genocide of 6 million plus Jewish people that happened, that I feel like is still a taboo subject to talk about, but is something that people should talk about, because otherwise it's almost like it didn't happen, and it absolutely did happen, and people should talk about it so that it never ever happens again. But it's difficult because you want to be sensitive and you don't want to upset people, and so it's a whole difficult subject to approach that should be spoken about. But then there's the Israel and Palestine situation as well, that is another thing that I feel like almost defines the Jewish community but shouldn't, but is something that probably, when people say the word, when people say, Jewish to me, I either think of the Holocaust or I think of Israel and Palestine, and I don't feel like that's fair, but maybe it's the English education system, because we are taught about World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, and maybe that's why those are the things that come to mind. But I try to avoid using the word Jew because I haven't been a member of that community group, and also because of the things that have happened throughout history. I'm not sure how that word is perceived in that community group by somebody that's not from that community group, if that makes sense as well.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think that, and that's where the thing, it's a lot of people get into a discussion about, that it is a culture and a religion, or it's an identity and a religion.
Yes.
And, people debate that topic. There's not a real clear, but that's the thing. It is much more, as opposed to, some groups. And in some ways, I will say, and this is something that I actually brought up when I was a lot of Jewish history has been summed up by the Holocaust. It's a horrific thing, and because it's recent, it's, but there's been other things, but the history's kind of gotten summed up a lot with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And obviously it's an important thing to remember. And that's why I'm saying I need to still identify in some ways, because, if there was that, it's not like, Hitler wouldn't have looked at my post and said, oh, this guy said he's not, they're going to say I have Jewish blood. If any sort of hatred any sort of hatred of Judaism, they're not going to say, he's okay because he wrote something saying he's not.
Yeah.
So, anti-Semitism is still something I'm, is subject to, and things like that. So that's where I think I don't like that's where the ex-Jew, because it's still a part of who I am.
My last question to you is, what advice would you give to people who have had similar experiences to you and feel themselves sort of fading away from their group, but maybe don't know the best way to finally say, like, look, I'm not going to be doing this anymore, or I'm not aligned to this anymore. What advice would you give to those people that are potentially fading out of their faith?
Oh, I mean, I think that I would tell them that, that, yeah, it's hard, especially because I know that, like, a lot of people, their entire social circle, their entire support community, but that you can find that stuff outside. You can find communities, you can find groups, you can find people outside of those things. And while it may be difficult at first, and, again, I'd also say, like they say with the getting religious, go in small steps. You don't need to just change overnight. You can go, start doing experiment, start doing something that you're comfortable. And I've given that advice on, the XJew Reddit. If you'll asked about, oh, I'm a little nervous, and, do what, do. And that's what I did. It wasn't like I just said, went from, this was a slow process. And I think that's what I'd say. Just take your time and, just do what's right for you.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Well, I think we've covered a lot. We've talked about your journey, your full circle journey of starting off like quite liberal in life and maybe just occasionally observing Sabbath, but not really being too strict on it, and then ended up kind of very much observing Sabbath and having a kosher diet and wearing the traditional Jewish clothing, and then kind of coming out the other end and being like, well, I'll occasionally observe Sabbath, might do a few of these things, but not going to tie myself to it strictly every single day of my life. So it's been a very interesting full circle story that you've told us today, and I do appreciate you coming to have that chat with us today, and especially just to have that little bit of a chat at the end about the more political, historical side of the religion that is not directly related to your story today, but also kind of is as well, which again comes back to that kind of trying to not be intrinsically linked to the Holocaust, but also not being able to not be linked to it at the same time. So it's one of those ones that's really hard for me to get my head around, but I really do appreciate you coming here today, for giving us your time. And if you could send me the link to your Medium post, I'd love to share it in the episode description, so that listeners can go and have a read of that if they'd like to. So definitely. Fantastic. Brilliant, Robert. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.